For cities to have truly successful public transport, it isn't enough to have a well-served downtown core or even central city. Instead, the entire urban area should be served by and interconnected to a fast and frequent network of transit. To the north and west of the city of Toronto are two regions, each with well over 1 million residents. In fact, combined, these regions already have more residents than the city of Toronto. That being said, they have vastly different transit systems. If Canada's biggest city wants to move the needle on affordability, emissions, and mobility, these suburban regions also need good public transit, which is integrated with that of the city of Toronto. So in today's video, I'm going to be comparing the transit on offer in Peel and York regions to try to determine which suburban region is doing better, and all the different places where they still have room to improve. In many ways, Peel and York regions are the future of the Greater Toronto Area. They're growing fast, and they will either cement the transit-friendly nature of the city of Toronto or undermine it. Now, an important note is that while transit in York Region is provided by a single agency, York Region Transit, Brampton and Mississauga both have their own distinct transit agencies. To see the distinctions between the regions, it's helpful to start with their rapid and higher order transit networks, and in this regard, York Region is far ahead. The region has a network of high-quality BRT routes forming an inverted T running east-west and north-south, covering many of its major centers from Vaughan east to Markham and north to Newmarket, which all connect the region internally. Meanwhile, the Line 1 York extension connects to the Viva network at Vaughan Metropolitan Centre, while the in-development Line 1 Yonge subway extension will connect in at Richmond Hill Centre. Unfortunately, while the subway connections and BRT routes look nice, where York Region falls apart is the service it provides. Viva buses, which run on the BRT, are not really turn up and go, and the dedicated lanes and stations feel like white elephants, mainly built to drive development and not to drive modal shift. This is frustrating because the infrastructure is great, while at the same time, buses on Steeles Avenue, the border between Toronto and York Region, run several times more frequently, move several times more people, and get no dedicated lanes. This is even worse because the network has numerous forced transfers, and while the Viva Blue route on Yonge Street does manage passable 10-minute all-day frequencies, York has zero 24-hour service, even on the iconic Yonge Street. The rapid transit situation in Peel is quite different from York. The Mississauga Transitway, which for much of its length is a fully grade-separated busway, connects the region to Pearson Airport, which is also in Peel and on the border of Toronto via Eglinton Avenue. And in a few short years, that connection will be made via rail, as the Eglinton Crosstown West extension finally brings the TTC subway into Peel, but just barely. Two other major bus rapid transit corridors in the style of York's Viva routes are also planned to travel west into Peel. One along Dundas, which will someday run nearly 50 kilometers, linking the various municipalities along Lake Ontario and supporting various different bus services. The other is an extension of the Highway 7 Viva Rapidway into Brampton on Queen Street. Ironically, Brampton already provides much better service on the parts of York's BRT routes that it runs on than York does, and this route within Brampton will likely be very well served and used. Linking Peel internally will be the Hurontario LRT, a tram route starting at Port Credit Station in Mississauga, running up past Cooksville Station, serving Mississauga City Centre, and continuing to Brampton Gateway Terminal at Steeles Avenue. While this project is positive, it will not be particularly fast or high capacity. Concerning as Hurontario is the main north-south artery in Peel region. By comparison, Surrey and Langley, two equivalent suburbs in Metro Vancouver that are both much smaller, will be connected by an elevated SkyTrain line, which is essentially a subway. The Hurontario line also doesn't do all that well in strengthening the regional transit growth centers in Peel, as it only skirts Mississauga City Centre and ends 3 kilometers short of downtown Brampton and Brampton Station. Thanks, Brampton. Now, both cities are trying to rectify the situation, Mississauga with a loop around the city centre and Brampton with a tunneled extension into its downtown. But it sort of feels like a late attempt to salvage which should probably not have been light rail. When it comes to local transit, the tables drastically turned. Even just getting footage of York Region buses outside of bus terminals for this video was a pain because they run so infrequently. It's actually unusual to see one driving around. Worse still than the horrible lack of service, many routes are scheduled with odd headways, like every 42 minutes, missing any benefit of frequency and of clock-face scheduling that could be aligned with other less frequent regional routes. This is extra egregious because York Region has built opulent terminals at a number of locations, which in the spirit of the Viva routes appear to mostly be motivated by having a pretty building that can help spur development. To be clear, nice terminals are a feature. It just feels screwed up to have a nice terminal and then buses that run every 40 minutes to it and sit parked for much of the day. The local transit situation in Peel is kind of the reverse. Brampton in particular might be the biggest transit success story in North America over the past decade, with ridership that has grown multiple times over. Despite not laying a kilometer of rail or even really building BRT, ridership has exploded as the city implemented a frequent transit grid and express services, with enhanced buses and stops known as Zoom. Ridership has even already recovered from the pandemic and will likely reach new heights in the coming year. Mississauga Transit, or My Way, is not as good as Brampton, but it's still far better than York, and also takes a local and express form. In recent years, the network has been improved significantly with a number of route redesigns, and it actually has some 24-hour service, which Brampton plans to introduce sometime in the future. Now, the bus terminals in Peel are on average decidedly less nice than in York Region, but that's generally okay because you usually don't have to spend 40 minutes sitting in them waiting for your bus. And at the same time, there are some nice terminals Peel transit services get to use. The new Kipling bus terminal that links to the western end of Line 2 of the Toronto subway being a great example. Both regions are ahead of Toronto in at least one regard. On all three transit systems, you can already pay with credit, debit, or your phone or smartwatch, and this level of convenience is a really nice touch. Before we go on, if you enjoy this video, you should consider subscribing to RMTransit and turning on notifications so you don't miss any future videos. With that out of the way, let's talk about regional transit. Right now, York Region has service from two different GO lines that are both being upgraded for high-frequency all-day service, sort of like regional subways, with trains up to every 7 minutes or so. These are the Stouffville line through eastern Toronto, which will have a high-frequency service to Unionville and southern Markham, and hourly trains beyond to Mount Joy, and the Barrie line through western Toronto, which will have high-frequency service as far north as Bradford and hourly service to Barrie, which will provide substantial north-south connectivity within York Region itself. Both these lines have seen massive upgrades in recent years, so they can start offering these increased service levels, including upgraded and expanded stations, additional track, and grade separations. The Stouffville line works are so far advanced that I did an entirely dedicated video on them, which you can see in the top right corner. There's also rapid GO regional bus service along the 407 highway corridor east-west through York Region, which by the nature of the 407's extremely high tolls never really needs to face congestion, and thus are fast and reliable. These services connect to Markham, Richmond Hill, and Vaughan, stopping at some of the opulent bus terminals, the York subway extension, the Stouffville line stop at Unionville, and potentially a new proposed station on the Barrie line at Concord. Most of these services also run right into Peel Region, serving Bramalea Station on the Kitchener line, currently planned to be the terminus of frequent service, akin to Unionville, which most trains from Bramalea will run to via Union Station. The GO rail service in Peel at first glance appears quite extensive, but unfortunately it's not quite so simple. The Lakeshore West line through southern Mississauga already has good service, with express trains, service every hour to Hamilton, through service to Durham Region and Scarborough, and longer distance service to Niagara. Service is only expected to become more frequent in the future, and the connection to the Huron-Ontario LRT will feed the line more riders. Meanwhile, the Milton line that travels through central Mississauga only has peak hour commuter direction service, despite its prime location because of its location within Canadian Pacific Railway's main freight line through Toronto. Service improvements have long been promised, and they could be achieved with new infrastructure, but nobody has seemed to want to bite the bullet. The last GO service that travels through Peel Region is the Kitchener line, which besides connecting to Toronto also connects to, you guessed it, Kitchener. Like the Stouffville line with York, frequent service just barely exits the city of Toronto before dropping off significantly, despite additional service further into Brampton to Brampton Station, where the Huron-Ontario LRT will eventually connect, and Mount Pleasant being a no-brainer. The issue here is somewhat similar to with the Milton line, as the tracks beyond Bramalea and technically at Bramalea belong to Canadian National Railway. Fortunately though, CN has seemed willing to play ball for half-decent service if GO is willing to build more infrastructure, such as with Hamilton West Harbour service, so it seems like 30-minute or better all-day service throughout Brampton could be in the cards. As it turns out, there is one extra rail service which technically runs into Peel, and that's the Up Express to Pearson Airport, which as I said before, is technically in the region. I wouldn't mention the Up Express, but for some journeys, the fastest way across the city might actually be to take it to Pearson and get onto a Mississauga Transitway bus, albeit the transfer is a pain. Ultimately, the transit in Peel and York regions leaves a lot to be desired. Service in York is bad, and the infrastructure in Peel is underwhelming. That being said, each of the regions do have some glimmers of hope. If York just drastically improves service, its transit system would suddenly be very compelling. With the new Yonge subway extension and expanded service, links into Toronto will be fast, frequent, and plentiful, while expanded Highway 7 bus service and GO 407 bus trips would provide an excellent and well-connected east-west service throughout the region. Finally, trips to York Region's north can be well served by fast electric Barrie Line train service and additional Viva Blue service. Now, today, Peel Region has far better service than York, but it could benefit from upgrading some of its transit facilities. The city centre bus terminal in particular feels tired, and GO buses don't even use it because of space constraints, stopping on the street instead. With rail coming in the future, even if it is only trams, a better designed facility that provides space for MyWay, Brampton Transit, and GO under one roof, as well as an indoor link to Square One, and provision for connections to a future Mississauga Transitway tunnel and rail connections, as well as weather protection and some other conveniences like a coffee shop and a 24-hour attendant would be great, not only for transit service, but for building the city's downtown. There also ultimately needs to be a better rail link between Mississauga City Centre and Toronto. A tram to the Lakeshore Line just doesn't cut it if this is to be a true downtown, and downtown Brampton by comparison already has hourly train service to Union Station. The best project to expand service in the medium term is likely an extension of Line 2 from Kipling West, quite possibly on an elevated guideway along the Milton Line, Dundas Street, and Huron, Ontario to the City Centre Transit Terminal. This would be an 11-kilometer project with stations at Sherway, Cawthra, Cooksville, and Mississauga City Centre. And given the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain, a project I talked about earlier in this video, is a longer line with twice as many stations, albeit for trains that are roughly half as long, it should be a really good indicator of price, which in that case is under $5 billion. That might sound like a lot, but that's not so different from the cost of extensions currently being built on the Eglinton Crosstown, Yonge Subway, and Scarborough Subway. A second link could be made between Toronto, Mississauga, and Pearson by converting the Mississauga Transitway into an extension of the Eglinton Crosstown line, something which it was actually designed for. Meanwhile, GO service should obviously be improved significantly on the Kitchener and Milton lines, and stations in Peel could generally all benefit from upgrade programs similar to the work seen at Unionville or Rutherford, making them feel more like proper rapid transit stations with concrete platforms, large LCD Nexa train screens, and full weather protection. Speaking of both Peel and York, the regions could benefit a lot from deploying more buses with LCD Nexa stop screens, something that's become really common in Europe and which York and Toronto have experimented a bit with. They could also benefit from implementing the Metrolinx wayfinding standard, especially since so much of their higher order transit is being provided by Metrolinx and will use it. And also because so many residents travel back and forth between the two regions, as well as within them. Speaking of that travel, better connectivity between York and Peel would be very valuable, whether that be through expediting the Queen Highway 7 BRT or even funding additional Highway 407 GO bus service that could travel between Mississauga City Centre and York Region. Orbital routes which connect the regions without going through the City of Toronto have significant value, both for directness and to reduce city centre congestion. All in all, there's a ton of potential for York and Peel to expand and improve their respective transit systems, providing better service, tying them together and to the City of Toronto, and making transit the best way of getting around. While there's a long way to go, the best time to start is now.